The climate in Florida provides excellent habitats for mosquitoes and mosquito-borne diseases, and both have been present in Florida for quite some time. As you can see from this graphic, the number of mosquito-borne diseases that have been documented in the state continues to increase. Since the 1800s, the one disease that's been effectively eliminated from Florida is yellow fever. Malaria is not very common, but on occasion there are limited local outbreaks. We currently see transmission of dog heartworm, dengue, eastern equine encephalitis, St. Louis encephalitis, and West Nile. And in the last 2 years, chikungunya was in the news, and county extension agents received a PowerPoint presentation on that disease and how to prevent it. And while Florida did experience locally acquired cases, there were 11 in 2014, it didn't occur explosively as it did in other countries. Now we face the possibility that Zika virus will infect Floridians. Right now, there's a lot we don't know about the virus and how Florida will be affected. It is best that we encourage our public to be proactive about reducing mosquito habitats and avoiding mosquito bites. Zika is the name of a virus that can be transmitted from humans to humans from the bite of an infected mosquito. The virus cycles between humans and mosquitoes. You might be familiar with some of the more common mosquito-borne diseases in Florida, such as West Nile and St. Louis encephalitis, and recall that these viruses cycle through wild birds and sometimes infect humans. But with Zika virus, there's no bird involvement. Again, it goes from human to mosquito to human. Infections in humans may or may not cause illness, and 4 out of 5 people infected do not exhibit symptoms. At this time, there's no vaccine against the virus. The symptoms include fever, joint pain, rash, conjunctivitis, muscle pain, and headache. You might recognize that some of these symptoms are the same as those seen in other mosquito-borne diseases, such as dengue and chikungunya. Commercial testing for Zika is not available, but there are guidelines and limited testing for physicians to aid in diagnosis, and a travel history would be conducted. For those who become infected, the recommended care is bed rest and supportive care, and the disease is usually resolved within a week, rarely with hospitalization. The virus is transmitted primarily through the bite of an infected female mosquito. 2 mosquito species have been shown to be able to transmit the virus. Aedes aegypti, which is commonly known as the yellow fever mosquito, is a competent vector, and Aedes albopictus, also known as the Asian tiger mosquito, was involved in transmission of Zika in Gabon. We have both of these species in Florida, and they are distributed statewide, but at this time, what we don't know is whether or not our local strains of the mosquitoes will be competent vectors. That question will be researched at the Florida Medical Entomology Lab. However, again, it is prudent for us to be involved with programs that increase awareness of these 2 mosquitoes and teach the public how to get rid of them. I'll have more on that a little later. Other potential modes of transmission include mother to fetus and sexual transmission. I will not be covering these 2 items in detail as we're focusing on mosquito transmission. I will point you to an article which is referenced at the end of this presentation in the New England Journal of Medicine by Dr. Anthony Fauci and David Morens from the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, who caution that research is still needed to either confirm or dispel a causal link between Zika infection of pregnant women and the occurrence of microcephaly in their offspring. Until 2007, Zika was a relatively obscure virus confined to a narrow zone around the equator in Africa and parts of Asia. In Africa, it was known mostly from forest monkeys, but subsequent work indicates that humans were often infected but not diagnosed with the virus. In 2007, a disease outbreak on the Yap Islands in Micronesia, at first believed to be dengue or chikungunya, turned out to be caused by Zika virus. Later outbreaks of Zika occurred in Polynesia, Easter Island, the Cook Islands, and New Caledonia. In 2015, a large outbreak started in Bahia, Brazil, and spread throughout South and Central America and the Caribbean. Large outbreaks of the disease have been reported from many countries in the area, including Brazil, Colombia, El Salvador, and probably others that have not yet reported accurate statistics. In the continental U.S., Travel-related cases of the disease have been reported from several states, including Florida. I want to discuss the terminology used in reporting of cases, and we'll consider imported versus locally acquired. One of the questions that arises with every case is where was the individual infected with Zika? A travel history is taken for patients, and this can usually lead to an idea of where the person was infected. If they're diagnosed in Florida but were infected outside of Florida, it's called an imported case. If the person had no recent travel to an area with active transmission, it would be considered locally acquired, which would mean that Florida populations of mosquitoes are transmitting the virus. As of today, there is no reported local transmission of Zika virus from Florida mosquitoes. All cases in Florida have been imported. The 16 cases that have been reported in Florida have travel history to such places as Colombia, El Salvador, Haiti, and Venezuela. Imported cases increase the risk for the establishment of local transmission because the virus is present in the blood of infected individuals for several days before recovery. This potentially exposes the person to biting mosquitoes, which could become infected and spread the virus to other people. At this time, there are 2 cases reported from Broward County, 3 from Hillsborough, 2 from Lee, 6 from Miami-Dade, 1 in Osceola, 1 in Santa Rosa, 1 in St. John's. And this information is updated at the Florida Department of Health website on a daily basis. Many of you are familiar with the Florida Department of Health Sentinel Chicken Program. That program is designed to monitor for mosquito-borne viruses that are involved in a cycle that includes birds. The viruses monitored in this system include Eastern equine encephalitis, St. Louis encephalitis, and West Nile virus. The Zika transmission cycle is human to mosquito to human with no bird involvement, so it's not one that's going to work in this Sentinel chicken system, and I want to make you all aware of that. Now to the mosquitoes. The mosquito develops through 4 life stages: egg, larvae, pupae, and adult. The eggs require water to hatch, but for the mosquitoes of concern with Zika, the eggs are not laid on standing water. They're laid on moist substrates above the water line, where they will dry out and then hatch when the water level rises. The larvae develop through 4 instars before they change into pupae. Both the larval and pupal stage are aquatic. If they're removed from the water during this time, they will not survive. After a short time in the pupal stage, they emerge as adults. Both the male and female seek sources of sugar from nectars and plant juices, and the females feed on blood for nourishment of their eggs. During the warm summer months, and given a decent nutrient supply, the cycle can be completed in as little as a week. Typically, the entire cycle would take about 7 to 10 days. The 2 mosquito species in Florida that are most likely to be involved in Zika transmission are Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that these are the same 2 mosquito species that are important in dengue and chikungunya transmission. You see Aedes aegypti on your screen right now. This particular species has been reported throughout the state. It's not as abundant as the other one I'm going to talk about, but it does occur in Florida and in some areas in high numbers. You can see the adult mosquito on the bottom left. She has striped legs, and there is characteristic white scales on her thorax, sort of in the shape of a lyre. And this is, let's move on to Aedes albopictus, which has a similar appearance. Again, striped legs, but on the thorax of this particular mosquito, the stripe is just one line down the center of the thorax. And a lot of our public is aware of this mosquito. The Asian tiger mosquito has been, we've talked about it for years, and a lot of people know this mosquito, and that's a good thing. We just want to direct them to how to get rid of them. Both Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus are in the group of mosquitoes that we call container mosquitoes. As I mentioned before, container mosquitoes lay their eggs on the moist inner walls of containers above the water line. They then dry out, and then they hatch when the water level rises. This is different from other mosquitoes that actually lay their eggs on standing water. In the adult stage, the container mosquitoes that we're talking about today stay close to home or stay close to where their larval habitats are. And then after mating and blood feeding, the female will find a container and lay eggs, and another generation begins. The container mosquitoes are not the ones that are typically targeted through the area-wide operations of a mosquito control district, and they're best managed through educational programs where we teach homeowners and property owners by showing them where the mosquitoes are thriving within their own landscape. That's a primary goal of these educational programs. There are hundreds of user groups out there who could use this information, and I ask that you be thinking of local groups that you work with and ways you can get them involved in getting the word out to the public about reducing mosquito habitats. And now I'm going to go through a couple of specific habitats for these container mosquitoes. Items that are used for yard work, wheelbarrows. If they're not turned over, they can collect water from rainfall or irrigation and be a source of these container mosquitoes. Flower pots that have saucers in the bottom that hold water are a great place for container mosquitoes to live. And then you find yards where people put things out that you might be considered trash, but they use them to put plants in, and if they're not well tended, then they can hold water and mosquitoes can develop there. Used tires are certainly something to keep an eye out for. The Asian tiger mosquito was actually introduced into the U.S. unintentionally through shipments of used tires, so this is one of the primary habitats for Aedes albopictus. Other types of habitats include bird baths, and in the bird bath you see on the left here, you can see that the water doesn't come all the way to the top, so mosquitoes can lay their eggs above the water line and have plenty to eat in this little source right here and survive just fine. Water features such as the fountain you see on the right hand side, if the water's moving, then mosquitoes shouldn't be in the water source. They don't like moving water, but occasionally you have people who don't maintain these. The electricity goes off and it's just a pool of water there. Certainly those would be a source to look for mosquitoes. And then in the picture of the bottom center, this is a roof line where leaves have collected in the gutter. The gutter's not cleaned out, water collects there, and then you have mosquitoes on your roof line. So a place people don't often think about for mosquito habitat, but certainly one that's important. And then other items like bamboo that's been cut, buckets, cans, bottles, any kind of trash laying around that can hold just a little bit of water is enough to support these types of mosquitoes. Excuse me. One kind of unique habitat for Florida for container mosquitoes are bromeliad plants. These can house container mosquitoes in the water holding tanks. This is very important when you're encouraging people to plant bromeliads in their yard. Please explain to them that they can house container mosquitoes. I spoke on bromeliads and mosquitoes at the Master Gardener Conference this past October. All the Master Gardeners who attended received the information, so get them involved in campaigns to reduce mosquitoes. The bromeliads can be flushed out with a water hose. There are products called mosquito bits or mosquito dunks that can be used in these plants. These particular products use a bacteria that is specific to mosquito larvae that has to be ingested by the larvae to become toxic. I have more about these products in a brochure that I'm going to show you at the end of the presentation. The role of UF-IFAS Extension from the mosquito side of Zika is to provide science-based information about ways to reduce exposure to mosquito bites and ways to reduce mosquitoes from around the home. We need to direct our clients to the Florida Department of Health and Centers for Disease Control for information on the human disease, and I encourage you to adapt your current programs and develop new programs to be proactive about mosquito source reduction. I will assist where I can if you would like for me to be involved. Okay, let's look now at more information that you can pass on to your local public. The three main things that we want to get across to people is to eliminate container mosquito habitats, to wear protective clothing when exposed to mosquitoes, and to use effective repellents. The bullet in the center, wearing protective clothing, is a little difficult sometimes in Florida because you're encouraging people to wear long pants, long sleeves, socks and shoes, and we know in the summer in Florida people just aren't going to do that, so we're really going to focus on container habitats and wearing repellents. Some recommendations for reducing mosquitoes, container mosquitoes in your yard, is to do yard inspections once a week. You can remove or drain water holding items, or you can modify objects so that they don't hold water. And I want to emphasize it's not enough to do it once. You need to do it weekly. Things change, things end up in your yard that'll hold water. Maybe the first time you do an inspection, you don't find anything holding water, but later on you will. So I'd encourage people to make this part of a regular routine. Neighborhood cleanup events. You can encourage your community to get involved right now. It's really going to require that everyone participate. If you clean up your yard and your neighbor does, but say 2 or 3 people don't, then you still have a source of these container mosquitoes within close proximity. So it's really important to try to encourage these community programs to do some major cleanups around the neighborhoods. While you're doing that, I would recommend that you encourage window and door screen inspections. People who want to leave their doors and windows open but have the screens there, make sure there's no holes there. These mosquitoes can get into some pretty small tears in windows and screens, so remind people about that. And then for water that can't be dumped out, I mentioned before mosquito dunks, which contain a mosquito-specific bacteria that work very well. For containers that are used for water collection, like rain barrels, place a screen over the top to prevent mosquitoes from laying eggs in the water. For bird baths, dump out the water and replace with clean water every week. I would also recommend scrubbing the sides of these bird baths because I mentioned that the mosquitoes lay their eggs above the water line. So just dumping the water out, you're going to dump out the larvae and the pupae, but you might miss the eggs. So if they can scrub the sides of those containers, that'll help. Get rid of or recycle used tires and clean the roof gutters. I know a lot of you have really nice rain barrel projects, and I've reviewed the literature, and I see that you mentioned insect screening over the water that will prevent containers from laying eggs inside the barrel. I would just remind you to review your literature, make sure you mention that. Encourage people who have these to make sure that the fitting around the gutter coming into the rain barrel has a tight fit around it so that the mosquitoes can't get in and lay eggs. All right, let's move on to mosquito repellents. They're certainly an excellent method of reducing exposure to mosquito bites. Proper application methods are important, and I think it's important to understand what active ingredients are in a product and whether or not that particular product has been shown to be effective. Current repellents include either a synthetic chemical such as DEET or plant-derived chemicals such as citronella. There are various formulations of these repellents, and they're available in different amounts of active ingredient, and that is a substance that actually repels the mosquito. The products are available as sprays, wipe-ons, sticks, foams, and lotions. And it's important to read the label before applying any mosquito repellent. So really what we want to do here is, because all the products are a little bit different and they have different recommendations, really encourage your clients to read the label. There are different recommendations for how often you can apply them. We certainly don't want people to over-apply them. And they need to check the container for an EPA-approved label and registration number. I've listed here some of the repellents that have been tested at FMEL, and it just gives you an idea of some of the ones that work for a long period of time. What we were doing here is looking at the time it took a mosquito to land after one application of the product. Now this was done in a lab, so it's going to be a little bit different when you're outdoors, you're in the real world, but it gives us a relative measure of which ones last long. Certainly those that contain DEET did very well, and different percentages of DEET. Even with a 6%, we had 2 hours of protection. The ones that didn't do so well were some of the ones that have the citronella and other essential oils in them. In the lab, we were only getting, for example, 20 minutes for citronella, 10% citronella. Translate that to the real world where you're out there sweating and being active. It's not going to provide you any protection time. And the wristbands that you see on the bottom here, we tested one that had DEET in it and one with citronella. And in general, the wristbands do not provide protection from mosquito bites. It doesn't matter what the active ingredient is. Please do not recommend wristbands for repelling mosquitoes. As with all the over-the-counter products, we encourage people to use common sense when they're applying them. Remind people that they need to watch for reactions because every individual responds differently to these various products. Some people may be allergic to an ingredient in the repellent, and they need to find that out before they put it all over their body. We remind people not to apply repellent to the mouth or eyes, cuts, wounds, or sunburned or irritated skin. And to apply it to their face, they really need to spray it on their hands first and then rub it on their face. Only apply the repellent to parts of the body that are exposed. Now, there are some repellents that can be applied directly to clothing. This is why we want people to read the label. There's some products you don't want to put on clothing because they'll melt plastic. Some of them actually can be applied to clothing, so have your clients make sure they look at what it says on the label. We encourage that young children not apply the repellents themselves, that they have an adult do this for them. And keep in mind that there are things that may decrease the effectiveness of a repellent, such as activities that cause perspiration, high humidity, high temperature, rainfall, and swimming. Some of the things that have been found not to be effective for repelling mosquitoes include devices that emit sound to repel mosquitoes, consumption of garlic, bananas, and vitamin B. And I know everyone has their own story that they consume garlic and mosquitoes don't bite them, but a Centers for Disease Control study showed that these were not truly repellent, so we don't want to recommend that. Bracelets, bug zappers, bug patches, these are all items that we certainly don't want to recommend. This is a good place to mention bats. Bats do eat insects, and they will eat mosquitoes, but mosquitoes are not their sole food source. So we never recommend that the presence of bats will protect people from being bitten by mosquitoes.